we're going to stick with Fournier, right?
Yes.
And anything else on this, or cap or no cap time?
Cap or no cap time. We can, if you want to get up there. And there we go. All right. So yeah, Evan Fournier, au revoir or a bientôt. I mean, it's not going to be a bientôt. I doubt we're going to see him soon. I would imagine if the Knicks really didn't want him to be with the team because he was upset, they might just say, hey, stick around. But stranger things have happened. So let's make an assumption. And maybe this doesn't turn out the way that it should, but these are kind of where I've assumed. So let's assume that the Knicks would be comfortable with or like more money going out than coming back in, because they're not too far away from the luxury tax with likely and really more unlikely bonuses. That they'd be comfortable with or like expiring money fitting into the Obi Toppin traded player exception. That any trade involving Evan Fournier would generate a traded player exception that's large enough to keep the door open for, say, like a player like OG Anunoby. Should he become available, someone of that size contract-wise, or returning salary that could be flipped for, again, a player like OG. Any of that not pass the smell test, or anything you'd like to add to that, John?
The only thing I would add is that if anybody listening doubts any of this, they should go back and check out Michael Scotto's reporting from about a week and a half ago, where basically he said the Knicks were trying to make a trade which would have checked three of these boxes. So yeah,
exactly. So let's start with the first type of trade, right? The star. Obviously, you can put the name of the star that you want in there, assuming that they make a larger contract. And the formula was essentially a star is Evan Fournier's salary and other salary filler, of course, picks and all the, kit and caboodle. When you look at someone like Joel Embiid, Paul George, Zach LaVine, any other trade names of stars that have been bandied about, if they're off the block or the price is just simply too high, that could rule Fournier out of salary aggregation. And if that's the case, that's fine. But it might mean that the Knicks want to then move on from Fournier in a different way, or hold on to him. But again, holding on to him could make an impact. The confusing part of Fournier, when I say confusing, I don't really mean it's confusing. It's more just it's unclear. Do the Knicks value Fournier as expiring salary, or do they value him as, hey, worst case scenario, he sits out for a year and we have his salary for the following year that if we wanted to guarantee it, we could use it as outgoing. I would imagine that given the commitments the Knicks have in salary for other players, and that they want a star, that they'd rather use other salaries and treat Fournier as an expiring contract because the money just gets so large. Yep. But perhaps things change. Does that line up with your thoughts as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any prayer, whether he's on the Knicks or anywhere else, that option is getting picked up.
Exactly. So let's look at some names of unrestricted free agents in 2024. These are players who are all earning between 12 and like around $20 million. And we just run through them. So first is Spencer Dinwiddie. He's earning, his cap hits about a little over $20 million. We got Joe Harris earning about $20 million. OG Anunoby, as I mentioned, is earning 18.6. Gary Trent Jr., who just accepted his player option, he's earning 18.6.
There's a rumored extension there we should note.
Mm-hmm. Marcus Morris Sr., who's earning a little over $17 million. Markelle Fultz, who's got $17 million. Jonas Valanciunas, $15.4 million. Tyus Jones is at 14. Doug McDermott's at a little under 14 million. Kelly Olynyk is a little above 12 million. And I figure we can rule pretty much all these players out, just all things considered, as opposed to OG Anunoby, Marcus Morris Sr., and Doug McDermott. There's one name.
Rule them out as far as what?
To rule them out as far as, once again, I do not expect the Nets, for example, to be making a trade with the Knicks involving Fournier and Dinwiddie.
Oh, you're saying these are possible options for the Knicks to trade Fournier for one of these guys. Sorry, I missed that part.
No worries. Joe Harris just went to the Pistons, so is that really the type of move that the Pistons then want to do?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. With that caveat, we could easily rule out Trent, Fultz, Valanciunas, Tyus Jones, and Kelly Olynyk. Yeah, none of those guys are getting traded for Fournier's expiring.
And there's likely another name here, which I didn't include, which would be Jonathan Isaac. like, again, if you're thinking, hey, the Knicks could use some size, versatility, defense at the 4, like what minutes? Yes. Like when Isaac is healthy, he's going to be playing a decent amount of minutes that aren't there. Isaac also isn't very healthy. He's got a non-guaranteed structure now that he's missed enough time, but the fact that the contract is so non-guaranteed should tell you about maybe why he's not the best option, why he's also not going to be the type of player who you want at the 4, given everything we've talked about with catch and shoot and how the Knicks like that and spacing. Yeah. So it didn't make a lot of sense here. But so we have 3 players, and I just want to talk them through very quickly. And first, we should obviously, yes.
Sorry, we should do that. The OG Anunoby and the other 2, Marcus Morris Sr. and Doug McDermott, the reasons why the Knicks might be including Evan Fournier in a trade for one of these, there's very disparate reasons.
Correct.
There's going to be an OG Anunoby discussion and then a very separate discussion about the other 2. Putting that out there.
So this is the OG Anunoby discussion. Once again, I don't want to get bogged down in the pick compensation part of it because it's just, I really want to focus more on the salary. Yes, this would essentially be the Knicks being buyers. It's not a 1-for-1 trade. It is not, hey, the Knicks throw in like a whack first round pick to try to get this. It's really more a factor of how can the Knicks take someone who's out of the rotation for someone who would be in the rotation. That's what they've done every single deadline. It's what I would expect them to do if Evan Fournier is still here, or they trade Fournier for someone and still want to get a player like Anunoby. The prevailing thought here that I just want to also talk about, I've mentioned in the past how, let's say this type of move happened, right? Whether it's now or at the deadline, whichever. There's the idea of RJ Barrett for OG Anunoby. It's not really one that I subscribe to, and it's not one the Knicks should subscribe themselves to either. The reason being, I stand by the fact that it is a poor fit to have OG, RJ, and Randall for really a good period of time.
Yes.
Given how they all have a tendency to play slower, more like 4s, and their games are they don't really complement each other or one another. But in terms of moving RJ, let's say the Knicks want to get a star and they let Fournier's contract come off the books, and so now it's OG and Fournier's his deal expires. You now have hamstrung yourself in terms of what you could offer to get a star. So essentially, from the Knicks' perspective, it's
matching salary specifically.
Exactly. So let's get someone out of the rotation and move them for someone who we want in the rotation, or fine juggling things until the offseason. And then after that, we can then try to make a move to better reshape our roster. That's the direction the Knicks should be going. This is the type of move that would accomplish that. I do not see this move happening now. I would be surprised even if it happens towards the deadline based on how the Raptors have operated, but there's plenty of time between now and then for those types of things to change. But I just wanted to get this trade out of the way quickly because it's not a trade that would be happening right now.
There was one way that they'd still be able to have outgoing salary, and that would be the outgoing salary of Julius Randle. But we don't have to go down the Knicks trading Julius Randle for a star thing right now. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why I think the Knicks are probably not going to be, unfortunately, because I really like him as a player and I like him as a theoretical fit in some iterations. But yeah, don't think it's happening.
So the third trade, Marcus Morris Sr. The Knicks can't move Fournier for Morris Sr. straight up. It's due to the Clippers and how high their payroll is. So the Clippers have to cut $1.7 million in order for this to work. Let's just say the player they throw in, Brandon Boston Jr., for the sake of it.
Kentucky.
Exactly. The Knicks could move Boston Jr. into the top and traded player exception, and then it would actually probably create a $95,000 TPE for the Clippers. I mean, that means nothing. The Clippers can't use that for anything. They also should be able to do this, which is instead of putting Boston Jr. into the top and exception, they could just make it one big trade, as opposed to splitting it up based on what the math. But even still, this is the type of move, if you're the Knicks, where I guess you're asking why the Clippers do it.
Yeah, why would the Clippers do this?
And I don't think they do. I don't think it makes any sense for the Clippers to do this. No, Morris Sr. has struggled a lot, but the one thing he does give you is size for a team that has as many injury concerns with Kawhi and PG as possible. And they have Terrence Mann. They have Batum. They have a bunch of players who can just do it for Norman Powell. They don't need Fournier. So the math can work, but now we have to figure out a third team. And we'd have to refer back to the list, and there just aren't a lot of guys who necessarily can do that. I mean, you could do it something with like Doug McDermott. You could do a 3-team trade with the above that I mentioned, but let's try to keep it a little bit simpler. We've talked about the idea of McDermott for Fournier. Fournier seems to want to be in San Antonio with Greg Popovich, with Victor Wembanyama. Can't say I blame him. I would probably want to be there too if I were a Frenchman looking to rejuvenate my career after somewhat of a sabbatical. I just feel as though if this trade were so obvious that it happened, it would have happened by now.
Yeah.
And it hasn't happened. And the Knicks are very eager to get this done because they don't want it to keep lingering. So clearly there's a reason it hasn't happened.
Just in regard to the Morris thing, I was about to ask you, I wonder if that's something the Knicks would throw in a second round pick to get that done. You get a shot at Boston, who again is a Kentucky guy, interesting prospect. He was like a top 3 guy in terms of like pedigree going into his college season. And then he just had absolutely the worst college season imaginable, which is why he didn't go until the 50 whatever pick in the draft. He's had some moments, showed some flashes as a pro, but the problem there is that Marcus Morris wants to play basketball and actually did play a lot of basketball last year for the Clippers. He averaged like 28 minutes a game, much to the chagrin of many Clippers fans. He's not coming here to play 0 minutes when the rest of the Knicks rotation is healthy. And again, this is like so many different things that we could talk about where it's like, well, if the Knicks did another trade where they're sending out a different rotation player in a trade that, and then you get into all kinds of craziness because it's just,
Right. And if the Knicks, let's say the Knicks did this move of Morris Sr. and Boston Jr. for Fournier, Morris Sr., let's say he sees minutes or is frustrated because he's not seeing playing time. Then you have to deal with, okay, what if he's playing? Boston Jr. doesn't get any playing time. Yeah. Probably doesn't get any playing time, even if Morris Sr. isn't involved, because the Knicks have a very stacked rotation. I don't think he would see a lot of time at the 4. That's not really his game. It's just more size than anything. I mean, yeah, you could probably relegate him more of a catch and shoot type player, but there's an opportunity cost there too as well. And is Brandon Boston Jr. worth that opportunity cost? It's just, it doesn't feel like something that would then pan out. Knicks could obviously do it because they could non-guarantee Daquan Jeffries' salary or Isaiah Roby's salary to make this work. But it just doesn't, the Clippers, again, doesn't make sense for them. And then the Knicks have their own battles to deal with this type of move.
I feel like I don't want to spoil the ending, but because I want to see, well, let me see where you're going with this. Cause I feel like this is all pointing in a very particular direction, but keep going.
Yeah, we'll see. So we talked about McDermott. Let's just talk about the Obi Toppin traded player exception. So the Knicks traded Toppin into cap space. His whole salary was $6,803,012. In terms of trades, it's not you don't just create a traded player exception by moving player into another trade player exception or cap space. It can really just be the difference between salaries incoming and outgoing. The Knicks can absorb a little over $7 million in money taking on another salary. Why is it $7 million? $7,053,012. It's essentially because with the new CBA, it's $250,000 more than the TPE. That is the max you can offer. So I figure let's take a look at some of the players who might be out there who are unrestricted free agents in 2024 who fit this description. So let's start at the top, right? Khem Birch. He's making $6,985,000, just under the maximum the Knicks could acquire. Patty Mills is making $6.8 million. He was just acquired. He went to a couple teams and now finally he's with Atlanta. Danilo Gallinari is making the same exact amount of Patty Mills. Chetty Osman's making a little over $6.7 million. Cameron Payne just traded from the Suns to the Spurs, making $6.5. Otto Porter Jr., he accepted his player option with Toronto. He's making $6.3. And then you have 2 players on the Sixers. Furkan Korkmaz. Korkmaz is making a little under $5.4 million. And Daniel House Jr., who accepted his player option, he's making $4.3.
And yes, to be clear, these are all players you're talking about the Knicks acquiring into that traded player exception. These trades would not involve Evan Fournier, correct?
Well, they would. That's
how so?
How would they? Well, it goes similar to, and we'll talk about this more, the trade that they set up with Indiana and Phoenix that didn't come to fruition, where it would have been Cameron Payne sliding into this traded player exception that was created with Obi Toppin. The Knicks moving Fournier's salary out to Indiana, and then it would have likely been TJ McConnell going to Phoenix, and then someone like Jordan Nwora going elsewhere for the math to work.
So my question there is, that would obviously be a 3-team trade. Is there the cap space out there for that sort of thing to happen? Because if Fournier moves to Team X, then Team X needs to then move money somewhere, and I feel like we're running out of cap space to do something like this.
Well, we've run out of cap space completely because no teams have cap space now. Exactly, but I like where your head is at. We are going to get there, I promise you.
Okay.
It's really just a matter of, can we find a way to move any of these salaries with other salaries and get Fournier involved and work from there. One of the advantages is that a lot of these players happen to play for one particular franchise. But very quickly, let's rule out two of these players, that being Daniel House Jr. and Furkan Korkmaz. The main reason being, for House Jr., he's close with Harden. Obviously, who knows what's going to go on with that whole thing, but it doesn't, in a 2-team trade, it's really hard to get around that. And the same thing could be with Korkmaz because they play with the same organization. So before we think about 3-team trades, we're just going to kind of analyze the two-team approach. Excuse me. So let's just quickly look through it. Again, don't see OG Anunoby getting traded to the Knicks right now. Down the line, or theoretically speaking, if the Knicks wanted to acquire Otto Porter Jr., they could slide Porter Jr. into the Obi Toppin traded player exception and still have Fournier for Anunoby. This would save the Raptors $6 million, give them a traded player exception of that amount. But it would also put the Knicks in the luxury tax. Is that something the Knicks are willing to do? I don't think so. I think there are other ways around it that they'd be more comfortable. Is this something that the Raptors want to do? I doubt it, for reasons we've stated before. So that doesn't quite work. Go back to the Spurs. Doug McDermott and Khem Birch. So I believe this should be the case where you could then do exactly that. You get Khem Birch sliding right into the Obi Toppin traded player exception, and you get Evan Fournier and you move Doug McDermott. Or you acquire Doug McDermott if you're the Knicks.
Now, see, this makes some sense.
Right. Again, I'm not all these trades are going to make sense. It's more just presenting ones that some fans might think, how does this work? And then showing why they might not. For this type of move, the reason why it could appeal for the Knicks, again, Birch goes right into that top and trade player exception. Then this could find a way to create a trade player exception for the Knicks of $5.1 million, depending on how they break it up. So if they were to move Birch into the trade player exception and then Fournier for McDermott, that should create a traded player exception for the Knicks of a little over $5 million. And you could talk about that with Chetty Osman instead of Birch, or Cameron Payne instead of Birch. The one difference, there's an asterisk on the presentation of Payne. The reason for that is he was just traded, so there's more of a restriction, 2 months for him. So you could do it before the season starts. It would just be delayed. Like, you can't do it tomorrow. But this is the type of thing where if you're the Knicks, you also you get a little bit close to luxury tax, which you probably maybe want. But McDermott's salary is large enough where if you then called up the Toronto Raptors at the deadline and tried to get the availability of OG Anunoby, where you're saying to Toronto, hey, we're sending you an expiring contract just like we would have with Fournier, but also it's going to be less money and the math still works, and we can still send you pick compensation that might make this a fair deal.
This is a trade I wonder if the Knicks would kick in one of their second round picks to accomplish.
Yeah, it's the bottom line for me, and this is the tricky part. Obviously, the Knicks, the way that it worked with Obi Toppin, the value of from where he was to where it's at, bad. Moving 2 second round picks to get rid of Fournier is essentially akin to attaching Obi Toppin to Fournier.
Why would it be 2?
No, I'm spitballing here. Like, for example, we talk about Joe Harris, right?
Yeah.
So
okay,
the Nets just sent 2 second round picks to Detroit,
but didn't take back any money.
Correct. But that's the thing. I don't think it would be 2 seconds, but it also depends on the quality of the picks, right? Like the Knicks didn't get good second round picks.
I bet
but if the Knicks are able to take on money that is unwanted by another team like San Antonio, I would hope the pick compensation lessens quite a bit. I do agree with you.
I would bet. Actually, no, I shouldn't say that. I would hope. I would wonder. How about that? I would wonder whether or not they could do this with one of their lesser second rounders. And the reason I really like this is Doug McDermott and Ken Burch at this point in their careers are both players that like they can play minutes for an NBA team trying to win basketball games. They do not need minutes for an NBA team trying to win basketball games. So these are two more guys who are like, again, breaking case of emergency guys, but they are better breaking case of emergency guys than Isaiah Roby. So, and again, and if we're thinking a little bit more down the line, if there was to be a 2-for-1 trade that would occur, I'm not saying one will, I'm not saying one should, but if there were to be a 2-for-1 trade that would occur, let's say at the deadline or closer to the deadline, potentially having I'm not saying either of these guys would even play in that scenario, but just having more warm bodies. So you're like, I know Doug McDermott could give me 10 minutes or 12 minutes, if I need, or Ken Burch too, honestly. I wonder if that would intrigue the Knicks. So this is something that but again, like you said before, if it was going to happen, it wouldn't have happened already. I don't know.
That's the presumption, unless a team like the Spurs, they're holding out, hoping that the Knicks get desperate because they don't necessarily need to do that. But
yes, or the Knicks don't want to kick in a pick, and they're basically saying you're getting a Wemby mentor here and a guy that is the best of these three players. Didn't work with us, but we still think he's the best of these three players. You should kick in the second round. I don't know if they would actually say that.
I think the main question that I'm curious about, and it seems like it's not really answered at this moment, is in the Scotto article, it talked about draft compensation going to the Pacers, but it didn't say which team was sending out draft compensation.
I found that interesting too.
I would have thought that because the Suns were getting an upgrade from Cameron Payne to TJ McConnell, that they would be chipping in more of it. With that said, it's not like the Knicks would have gotten off scot-free because they're still clearing a lot of money. Yeah. And they create that trade player exception, which, as you pointed out, there's a player in Toronto that we've talked about, and OG Anunoby, who would certainly fit into that. Yeah. So I wonder if it would be both teams. I can't help but walk away feeling like it would be both teams, but it doesn't matter because it's moot now.
Yeah, it's moot now. But
it was still a prevailing thought. So the same trade again, but instead of maybe sliding Burch into the trade player exception that Obi had, just lump them together. This would create a $1.8 million trade exception for the Spurs in this case, I believe, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, that would do it. So again, I believe if that works, then you could tinker around with it. I'd still probably prefer Burch into the traded player exception that Obi has. And then the Knicks are able to create that $5.1 million exception while taking McDermott's salary on. Let's talk about Reggie Bullock briefly, because I know he was bandied about. If you did Bullock and Burch as an example for Fournier, you could slide Burch into that trade player exception and still have it with Bullock. The issue here, well, a couple issues. Number one, can't move Bullock with another player until after
3 months, right?
10th.
It's December 10th. Sorry. Okay.
September 10th. 2 months.
September. Yeah. So but you can do it before the season. Okay.
But you can do it before the season, which is the hurdle that's easy enough to cross. The other issue, though, is in terms of aggregating salary, could be a problem as a next step. So if you did McDermott for Fournier, it works. If you do McDermott and Burch for Fournier, it works 2 times over, right? You could do McDermott and Fournier already. You could do McDermott and Burch into the trade player exception. You could do McDermott and Burch without dealing with the trade player exception and still do that. With Bullock, you can't do Bullock for Fournier straight up. You do Bullock for Burch and get Fournier. The reason I'm drawing attention to this is it just means that you have to get closer to aggregating salary in order to make that move. Whereas a player like McDermott, again, if it's an OG type, you could just move McDermott to get OG. You don't have to move Bullock and someone else, especially when roster sizes are going to be important. And that's why I'd really rather shy away from it. I also don't trust Tibbs enough to not play Reggie Bullock.
That's fair.
So that's why I'd really rather not go the Bullock route. And I think the Knicks made the right call in not bringing Bullock back.
I think they were proven right on that. Yeah.
And nothing has really changed to change their minds. Maybe Bullock doesn't even see significant time. It could also be that the Spurs don't feel like they need Fournier because they have Bullock there and he could soak up the same type of minutes that they'd want. I genuinely not sure, but I would prefer the Knicks not go after Bullock because it means they probably have to add another piece just to get an OG type.
Yeah, look, I'm sure Tibbs would love to have Bullock back in the locker room, even if he wasn't an active member of the rotation. And yet, I would wager you a donut that by hook or by crook, Reggie Bullock would be finding his way onto the basketball court at some point for head coach Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah, and there are better players on the Knicks in order for us to see that.
There are better players on the Knicks.
So let's take a look at traded player exceptions because, John, as you mentioned, there are no cap space teams. And if you maybe have trouble with some two-player team or two-team trades, you might need to loop in a third team. So just running from the top down, these are all the traded player exceptions that are here that are $5 million or more. I should say really exceptions, not traded player exceptions. I will clarify why in a moment. Let's start first. The largest one being the Atlanta Hawks. They have $23 million left of the $25.3 million traded player exception that they created moving John Collins. They've already used a little bit of that to take on Ty Washington before he went to OKC. I don't see the Hawks and the Knicks working together here based on the fact that while the Hawks could certainly absorb this salary, they're so determined to not pay the tax, and there's not bad salary enough really that could work. Like we could talk about Patty Mills, but then they don't have a backup point guard. We could talk about Fournier being on their team, but they already have Bogdanovich.
They don't need it. They're certainly not paying.
Right.
Getting close to the tax to inherit Evan Fournier.
Exactly. So to me, they just don't feel like a very realistic trade partner. Again, neither do the Nets, who have not one, not two, but three traded player exceptions on this list. Two of them that are $18 million or higher. The first one's 19.9. That's the Joe Harris one. They could certainly absorb that salary. Again, don't see it happening. The next one's the $18.1 million one. They cannot absorb that because with the trade player exception rule of, $250,000, don't believe they could be able to fit Fournier's salary in, even if the rule changes when you get a higher traded player exception. Doesn't matter. Again, it's still the Nets. I don't see why they're working together with the Knicks. I'll believe it when I see it. The Wizards, they've got a 12 point. Yes, go on.
So why are we concerned with traded player exceptions that are below Fournier's salary?
I will get to that in just a moment.
Okay.
Well, all right. I'll say it now. It really comes down to the fact of look at exactly how the Knicks were operating with a potential 3-team deal, where if they need to move salary, but they don't necessarily want to get a hodgepodge back,
they
want to create a trade player exception, and if they need a third partner that doesn't have cap space,
gotcha.
The next route would be to look logically at a team that has trade player exception, and maybe they can finagle.
Maybe there's a way to finagle something. Okay.
Correct. It gets more complicated, but it's still possible. Then they just floated a 3-team deal, so figure might as well. Again, the Porzingis traded player exception of a little over $12 million, that's not going to fit Fournier. Maybe there's a deal out there that could do that. Lonzo Ball, that's not a traded player exception. That's why I clarified this is not officially a list of all traded player exceptions. They got a disabled player exception because they believe Lonzo Ball is going to be out for the entire season. That's essentially half of his salary this year, $10.2 million. The Bulls are pressed very close to the tax now that they brought Ayo Dosunmu back. They can't acquire a player like Fournier. It's too much money anyway, but it's not used like a traded player exception, so to speak. And the rules are very clear about it. So that's not realistic. Another Wizards traded player exception. The Heat have a traded player exception. Again, like the Nets, don't see a trade materializing no matter what. I don't believe it. The Blazers have one. The Grizzlies have another. Heat have another one. Obviously, the Knicks can't trade with themselves. Another Nets one. A Celtics one with Grant Williams is $6.2 million, and another Wizards one. So I'm going to rule out pretty much all of them except for the 3 Wizards trades and the Blazers and the Grizzlies trades. Trade player exceptions. And even then, I'd like to rule out the Blazers and Grizzlies ones. Can we talk it through?
Sure.
The Blazers are so in flux with their team that I don't feel like they're at the position where they can really take on anything. Like, it feels like they're paralyzed.
Yeah, it's fair. Until they figure out what's going on. Yeah.
Right. And the Grizzlies, they do have a decent amount of luxury tax space where they could do something. So it's certainly possible that they could jump into this. Again, it's just, you have 3 teams. This is now more complicated. You got to get other salaries involved. Do they want to take on money? They've already got a pretty full roster. I'd say they need to consolidate like a lot of other teams do. So
they've taken on money in the past, but they do it for picks.
Exactly.
So someone's paying a pick here.
Right. And I don't think that would work quite as easily as, say, a team like the Wizards. So, this is just a recap. We talked about the whole trade with the Pacers that didn't come to fruition because that's why finding a third team can be tricky. And here's the whole thing about what the blurb that Scotto had and the failed 3-team deal. We're all caught up on that. But I just want to take a look at the Knicks, Pacers, and Wizards as an example where if you are the Wizards, right, this type of move, you could take on Daniel Tice's salary, which is, it says 2 years remaining, but the second year's a team option, just like with Fournier. And then you get Jordan Nwora. If you're the Pacers, you move those moves out. You get Evan Fournier. If you're the Knicks, you slide Danilo Gallinari into the top and trade player exception, and you create the same trade player exception you tried to do with the Knicks, Pacers, and the Suns. One snafu here: the Wizards, who already had 16 guaranteed salaries, would now have 17 with this type of move. They're adding $5.3 million to their payroll. The Pacers are adding $6.7 million. I could see the Pacers saying, hey, we're taking on more money. What do we get? And the Wizards saying, hey, we're taking on more money and we now have to cut 2 players. What do we get? Yeah. So I think there needs to be a little bit more tinkering. And then you get to something like the same deal I just mentioned, but a player like Anthony Gill sliding over from the Wizards. And here's how it would basically happen. It'd be Fournier going to the Pacers. It'd be Tice and Nwora going into the Wizards traded player exceptions that they have. It'd be Gallinari going into the Knicks Obi Toppin traded player exception. And then Gill, instead of going into the Evan Fournier traded player exception, right? Because as thought before, he's a minimum salary. And the way that it works with minimum salary is there's the minimum, the veteran minimum exception, right? It's the same way when the Cam Reddish trade with Kevin Knox, they didn't do it as Cam Reddish and Solomon Hill for Kevin Knox and a pick. Well, I guess a second round pick with the Hawks thing and the Knicks sending over the Hornets pick. It was broken into 2 where Hill was acquired for nothing because he was a minimum salary. Yeah. That's how Gill would function. So the thought process here would be if we have to do a 3-team deal, the Wizards take on a little bit less money than the move before. They have the same amount of guaranteed contracts, 16. So they still do need to probably cut a player or figure out a way to move them elsewhere. The Pacers are exactly how they would be in terms of salary, whether it was with the Cameron Payne move or this type of deal. And the Knicks, again, like I don't expect much from Gallinari. I don't see him as like, wow, he's a 4 getting significant time. It would be just kind of like, hey,
break in case of emergency.
It's right. It's the salary that goes there. So this is the type of move that would satisfy all parties, similar to that of what the Suns deal could have been, because it's 2 of the same teams. The difference here being I moved Tice out instead of McConnell because I figured it would actually save the Pacers a little bit more money involved. But you have to imagine cash considerations. Knicks sent at least a second round pick, that sort of thing. But curious your thoughts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Nwora's I think Nwora's still a mildly interesting player. Had some moments for Indy for Indy last year. And yet the Wizards have a lot of mildly interesting young players. So do they want another mildly interesting young player, except one that hasn't even been in their system? They also have some, and they just drafted a rookie who they're going to want to play. So it's like but then again, where is Nwora going to play? I would imagine the Pacers would want some sort of draft compensation to do this deal. I mean, the Knicks could sell it, right? They could sell it as like, we're getting we have if we need a backup four, again, if break in case of emergency, he's a guy they know. Be a cool little story, right? Not quite Melo coming home, which has been rumored for years, but it's the guy who was traded for Melo, so maybe that's worth something. It's interesting.
Look, I mean, I'll be honest. It's not my preferred move here. It's more just if you can't go the 2-team route and you had to have a third team, I think the Knicks and the Pacers do match up well in terms of the finances and the excess salary and all that. So it's really just finding the third team to help carry the load, so to speak, phrasing financially. And that's where the Wizards come into play. But moving on to the Spurs, I just want to go back to them. Their cap sheet, it's hard not to look at this team and look at how the salaries and the expiring ones. And I've got this here where it's McDermott, it's Bullock, it's Zach Collins, it's Kem Birch, Cedi Osman, Cameron Payne, all unrestricted free agents in the 2024 season. The other thing to keep in mind, if you look at all these players, it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. There are 17 players on the Spurs in guaranteed salaries. So the advantage of that 2-for-1 type move with McDermott as being more of the foundation and then adding one of the salaries involved that I mentioned, not Bullock, but one of the ones that would fit in the trade player exception, is it does help the Spurs have one fewer player to cut when they need to trim the roster from 17 to 15. Going from 16 to 15 is certainly easier. So that's certainly a prevailing thought. But while we're on this subject, and I know we've talked about McDermott, I need to focus on how bad his defense is.
Well, there's a reason a guy who's that good of a shooter doesn't play.
Exactly. And the reason
for a better team, I should say.
Yes. The reason I'm honing in on this is because I just know, let's say the Knicks made this type of move. There are a lot of fans who are going to look at the spacing, and it's very good spacing. Don't get me wrong. Shoots corner threes and threes in general.
Good shooter.
Right. It's okay. 2017, he was in the first percentile on defense. This is all defensive EPM. 2018, the year that he was on the Knicks, 29th percentile. We know how bad that was. Next year, 15th percentile, 11th percentile, 5th percentile. And then the last 2 years, he was in the 2nd percentile both times. Granted, Spurs were a bad team last year. They were not. They were bad the year before that, although less bad. Even still, like Keita Bates-Diop was in the 80th percentile on defense. So you can shine in that system. That's just not Doug McDermott's game. And there's a point in which the spacing, like with Fournier, there's a reason that the Knicks are looking to move on from him because he doesn't do the defensive part that they need him to. McDermott is very similar to that, just can play up as opposed to where Fournier is.
Yeah. And
then Cedi Osman. I wanted to compare Cedi and Obi. So they're not that different in terms of how their EPMs often stack up. Obi had a better year in 2022 by a lot compared to Osman. Obi had a better year his rookie year compared to Osman. The point being here is Osman does not really, again, he's more theoretical. There's a reason the Knicks got rid of Obi because they didn't feel what he brought to the table was adequate. Cedi Osman's overlap is very similar to that. And a big reason is the catch and shoot threes. We've talked about how of the players who took 100 catch and shoot threes last year, 248 of them, 5 of the top 82 are Knicks. Now, last year, Osman of those 248 was 129th. The year before that, of the 239 who took 100 total catch and shoot threes, 164th in 3-point percentage. The year before that, 227, he was 214th. The year before that, it was better. Out of the 209, he was 93rd. But this paints a very complete picture of, yes, he shoots a lot of threes. There's a high frequency there, which is great. But the catch and shoot is just, it's bad. He's not the theoretical type that you want to be there. He's not the realistic type you want to be there.
If he was, the Cavs wouldn't have spent the last however many years looking under every rock, literally everywhere, to try to find a suitable two-way wing. He doesn't give you enough at either end, which is why, he is where he is in his career.
So, and I can't believe I didn't think about this until I did this podcast. Conclusion. I have conclusion thoughts all the time, but I did not think to do conclusion. But here we are. In conclusion, I think the best thing if you're the Knicks is to hope for a suitable deal with San Antonio, assuming you can't get a star using Fournier's salary, assuming you can't move him for a starting level or let alone rotation quality player. If it doesn't work, then you have to look for a 3-team deal. And I don't think you're going to find a rotation player when you move Fournier. I think it's going to be much more of chairs on the Titanic, deck chairs and shuffling them. But of course, the more teams you involve, the more complicated it gets. So in a perfect world, I think I'd much rather have Fournier for McDermott and say like Birch, where again, I don't see Birch seeing any significant minutes. I don't even know if he's a breaking case of emergency guy. It's more just if you're trying to move someone out and you want to move something in that is comparable to what you want, that could work.
Two thoughts. One, if I had to make a prediction right now, I think Fournier is in San Antonio by the time the season starts. I wonder if these two sides at this point are not just, if it's maybe, who knows, maybe the Knicks would be like, you're sitting here and like, we want Billick. And the Spurs are like, we'll give you McDermott. Like, who knows? Great. Anything's possible.
Sure.
That's one thought I have. Second thought, and this is the main thought, and this is what I was going to say before, but I figured I'd save it to the end. Everything that you've detailed today are ways to solve the Fournier problem, which is that he's a player that is here who doesn't want to be here, and the Knicks I don't think they want him here. And it's figuring out a way. How can we get him outside of here? Well, maintaining a situation that is in our best interests. I would not characterize as anything like everything that you've gone through. Like if Fournier was hunky dory sitting here on the bench and just chilling for the next year and being like, hey, if you need me, I'm ready. Put me in, coach. I'm happy to do whatever you want. I don't think we'd have to go through any of the stuff that you just went through. But that is not the situation, which Evan Fournier made it very clear, which leads me to the larger point, which is that it is very clear to me, and I don't know if it's clear to you, that if at the very least, Evan Fournier thought when he made his comments months ago or a month and a half or whatever it was, whenever the season ended, his immediate comments after the season, he's like, of course I'm going to be traded. His thinking was what many of us thought, which is that the Knicks are going to utilize his contract as a strength, as salary to aggregate in a trade for a player that makes a lot of money. And that was the way to use him not from a position of strength, but like use him to their interests. We've now moved into the portion of the program where that does not seem to be on the table anymore. And I just wonder if the Knicks are faced with several options, which are, I don't want to say varying degrees of unpalatable, but like, again, as we've been talking about, like none of this stuff is great, right? If all of that is in the bowl of option one, and there's option 2 bowl, which is just like, hey, dude, go back to France, chill, smoke a cigarette for a few months, and like when we're able to use your salary in a trade that we want to use it for, that is in our interest, we'll call you. Like I just wonder if there's a part of them that's like, can we still do option B? That's what I'm thinking. That's all.
Yeah. He has more to offer, which is the frustrating part, which is why I feel like if you're looking at McDermott and Birch, or really a lot of the other players we've mentioned, and from the Knicks perspective of you're saying, look, we're sending a player who should be a rotation player. We just cannot, we can't roster this person because we have other needs. Yeah. It's just, that's the main issue. Whereas there's not a compelling argument that McDermott belongs in a rotation. And there's not one that Birch belongs in rotation, but there is a compelling argument that Fournier, with his pull-up ability, with his catch and shoot opportunities, that's someone who he's still a better version and a younger version than McDermott. Obviously, different size, different position for the most part, but lo and behold, I'm with you.
Yep.
I hear you.
We'll see what happens. I'll stick by my prediction. I don't think he's on the team come camp, but we'll see. Crazier things have happened. All right. I think we covered everything. Is there anything else we didn't, or are we good here?
We're good.
Okay. And is Andrew back? I wonder if Andrew's
Yes,
back.
he is.
Andrew's back. Okay, great. All right, so we're gonna get out of here. Moving forward, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say anything about this. But moving forward, we're gonna have more pods for you coming in the immediate future of the evergreen variety. We have some fun stuff that we're gonna get into. Starting with an episode that the three of us, Andrew, Jeremy, and I, are going to record right now. That is going to be coming your way, I think, in a week or whereabouts. Here's GMAC. Your screen was black. I just want you to know that your screen was black for a moment there. It's not black
now?
anymore.
You're good.
But it was black for a second. For like 2 seconds.
Look at you. I'm proud of you.
See what I did there?
You actually saw something wrong and you mentioned
I saw something and I said something.
Yes. Well done. You'd be good in a subway. Or an airport for that matter. Yeah, you don't have to give too much detail. Just we are still going to be producing content for all you. It's going to feature multiple members of the KFS faculty and staff over the next couple of weeks. As I mentioned on a previous pod, should the Knicks do something, honestly, like an Evan Fournier trade, we probably will pounce into emergency episode mode. But for the meantime, over the next month or two, content will be coming, but it will be of the evergreen variety, as Jon mentioned. So stay tuned and hope you enjoy it.
Giddy up. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Jeremy, thank you as always. Everybody, hope you have a great week and talk to you soon. Peace out.